Whether you want more innovation more easily, you are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed, or you simply know that something isn't quite the way you know it can be, you are not alone. I hear the same from leaders every day. On Uncommon Leadership, we explore aligning personal fulfillment with business success, creating authentic teams, and cultivating the resilience necessary to move beyond simply surviving today's challenges into thriving. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams, and today we'll uncover fresh insights in what it means to lead today. Joining me is Dan Tocchini. Dan has been helping leaders bring some magic to their teams for over 35 years. He has worked with executive teams from Interstate Batteries and ESPN to Smarty Pants Vitamins and Impulse Space, as well as nonprofits like Homeboy Industries and Defy Ventures. Dan gives a no-fuss approach by helping transform leadership teams without any pixie dust. Just courageous leadership, creative conflict resolution, and relevant restructuring. No conversation is too difficult, no situation too conflicted, because a leader with a vision cannot be held hostage by circumstance or history. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Have been looking forward to this conversation all week.
Me too.
Dan, when did you first recognize that integrating your whole self, bringing that into everything that you do, might be a valuable approach?
Well, I think it came after a number of failures where I thought that separating, for instance, my family life from my business life, not including them at all, or just siloing aspects of my life wasn't working. I decided to, experiment with breaking down those silos, and it became a multiplier effect. And it's been quite profound, both for myself over the last 40 some years I've been in business, and for those that I have the privilege of serving.
What signals were you recognizing that indicated maintaining those silos might not be having the effect you wanted?
Well, the main thing was I was being surprised often. Things would occur and I would be caught by surprise. And then when I debriefed the breakdowns, I realized that those things had revealed themselves way before they became a problem. And that was really quite, I remember thinking at one point, wow, I could have seen this coming if, for instance, like my wife would have said, well, Dan, there was this or there was that, or a partner would say, in debriefing it, here's something, that we might have paid attention to. And if I hadn't been sharing what was going on, I hadn't been including them in the process. And so it started getting evident that they should be involved. And in fact, oftentimes people that you don't think are going to be crucial turn out to be, I would say, vital to the life of whatever you're doing. So, and I can't get to them if you think about it. You can't get to them if you've isolated them.
You're right that when we isolate, we prevent people from helping us in the parts of our life that we've cut them off from. And I find the same as you, that I am often surprised by where advice or suggestions or help or insights come from. It's often not from where I would expect.
Yeah. Well, and I've found that the things I keep from them are the very things I need assistance on, because I'm afraid to be vulnerable, to expose my Achilles heel, or appear weak. And so by being able to talk about those things, being able to find language to put on it and express it, opens up an opportunity for others to contribute to me as I lead. And that is interesting. I had a young protege I was training, and he helped me think through something. And he said, one day I asked him, "How are things going?" He said, "Well, one of the most empowering things I've experienced over the last week is that when I was able to help you think through this and spotted things you didn't see." And it was interesting because I thought, well, it's interesting because I see you now, as a real resource, whereas before I thought I was training you, but in fact, yes, I am training you, and you're training me. You're helping me see what I don't see. So very powerful time with him, and that's occurred multiple times in my career with leaders. If it's just amazing what kind of resources at the table if I'm disciplined about being clear about the mission, holding that in sight, keeping that aim up, and making it the most important thing. Well, then why not look at my weaknesses if that's going to strengthen the mission?
And in addition to that, being open to the information that might be coming up to you from channels where you might have believed that you're only ever pushing data down through.
Yeah, yeah.
How much information are leaders today missing out because they think they manage these people, they're helping these people do their job, and they're not allowing for the possibility that those people, their people that they've hired onto their teams for being smart and genius and brilliant people, might have something that could help the leader do their job too.
Well, I think it gets filtered through if I if I open up, if I get exposed whatever isn't working or what my blind spots are, somehow they're going to not respect me anymore. And really, the key I think there is what I want to do is create a culture of curiosity, of humility, because if we're learning, we're going to pivot quickly. That doesn't mean I'm not clear. It doesn't mean I don't take a stand. It doesn't mean that I'm not willing to make a mistake, but I'm certainly going to be wide open and curious. And if I'm going to have any kind of plan, a succession plan comes out of an idea that what I'm doing through the culture is actually training the people I'm working with to see things that they would normally not see, that I see because of my experience, because of the many times I've failed and come back. Well, that's a gift to them. And then their fresh eyes is a gift back to me. But there's no doubt in my mind, and I know there's no doubt in my team's mind, that I'm the one that's going to make the ultimate decision. That I have the power differential in my favor. It's my business, or I've been hired to run the business, or whatever that is. I don't need to press that into their. I don't have that. That's not a badge I wear like a sheriff. That's just that's a responsibility I have, both to the organization, to the board, and to the people that I lead. And I want to hear what they have to say. And also, I get a lot of buy-in by that. I get a lot of good ideas. I get a lot of buy-in. I get people, the creativity, the resource at the table. And I'm much more confident when I do it this way to delegate and know that what I've delegated is most likely going to get done. And if there's a problem, it's going to come to me much earlier than if they feel like they can't talk to me, or they have to have it packaged just right, or they have to always be successful. So,
How do we find that balance between being open and vulnerable, asking for feedback, and also holding the line that ultimately I'm the one making the decisions, I'm the one responsible for the outcomes if they go south. Uh, I'm the one in charge, to put it perhaps coarsely.
well, I think it's a contextual issue. You've got to, what context am I in? I mean, if we're in I want to hear feedback, but because I've heard your feedback may not mean I'm going to take action on it if it doesn't fit what I think is best for the company. And I'm going to be straight about that. I think a lot of it is being able to language, put words on what I'm thinking in a way that people can understand. They can see how they're connected, how we're connected in the process. And what's most important is that we win, that we actually have it. We push the ball over the line. It's not most important that I'm right. It's not most important that you're right. It's most important that we win. And I think that comes from orienting people to that by just the way you're with them, by them actually experiencing what's most important to you. You can say, it's very easy to say, this is most important for me because it's the company. But then if I go off and act on personal agenda that is obviously disadvantageous to the company, I'm sending a message. And as a leader, I think it's really important, at least for me, it's been vital to pay attention to how I'm living with my team. Am I living congruently with the values and mission, purpose, and vision that we've stated? And if I'm not, where can I get that? Where can I correct? Where can I openly express what's working, what's not working, and what's wanted and needed, right? I work to keep it out of a personal identity conversation and on to what's wanted and needed. Like what's wanted and needed here. Who can best provide that? Let's have that. And if I'm thinking like that, and I'm thinking like that in my discussions and conversations, people are going to live in that conversation. They're going to know what's going to make a difference. They're going to know how to frame breakdowns. They're going to have a better sense or orientation about how to work with me and each other and what's valuable, right?
I like that focus on what's wanted and needed because it takes away the value judgments of I do this thing, it's a bad thing or it's a good thing. Uh, my my colleague does something else, and that's a bad thing or it's a good thing. They're all just things. They're all great in certain context and it's incredibly unuseful in other contexts. And if we're always focused on what's wanted and needed to help the team move forward and achieve their goals, as you said, then the vulnerability of saying the things I'm good at aren't really useful in this situation are maybe easier. And also the vulnerability in saying the things I'm good at are exactly what you need in this situation is
Yeah.
also easier, which can sometimes be way harder than saying I'm not I don't have a lot to bring to the table here because that involves believing in ourselves and stating out loud that we are exactly what's needed in the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm involved in a collaborative project now. I literally said at one point, look, how many of you have done this before? And very few of them, I could tell they hadn't done what we were doing. We're collaborating on a project and we were planning the project out. And it was clear that they hadn't done this very often, if at all. And I said, I've done this quite a bit. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to frame it and then get your input. I think it would give I think I could help give context or at least make it productive. And they were all go, please do it. Right. And I know they were open to it because I didn't just come in and force that. I checked in, we were talking. I could tell there was a void here. They didn't know exactly what to do. I'd done this before. I could put words on it. And I wasn't doing it like, oh, let me do this. How about I frame this up? And then you guys tell me what you like and don't like, what you think is going to work, not work, and let's reason through it. And that worked really well. And what could have been a 2 or 3 hour meeting ended up being an hour, and very productive. But I know it had a lot to do with just me saying, hey, I've done this, I can before, and not that I know all the answers, but I can give some context, and then together we can create. And there was some really good contributions that took the thing in a direction I wouldn't even have thought of going, right? Which is really fun. And everybody was excited about it. In fact, I got a call the morning after that meeting, and there was a gal who was just excited about what occurred for her during the meeting, and she wanted to talk about it, which to me was just exciting because she was calling me, and I could tell we had buy-in, and things are going to happen. When you have buy-in, stuff happens. So
And what you did there of starting by centering yourself and then taking time to enter that particular metaphorical room part of the conversation is what enabled you to so vastly turn the conversation from a lot of people trying to muddle through something that they didn't have much expertise with to you
expertise on.
offering to bring all of your expertise and zoom it right along.
Yeah. Yeah. And I knew they had a lot to give, right? Each one of them are really accomplished. They just hadn't done this particular thing before. So it was about how do we get all our talents working together? How do we align? And that came a lot easier when somebody just stood up and said, "Hey, why don't I take just a shot at this and then let's go from there." So
It's a
and I have a habit of if there's a void, I'm just going to step in and see what I can do.
that's a really great example of how letting people shine through their expertise moves everything along faster, most smoothly, more fastly, as we were talking
Yeah,
about
well, I feel
earlier.
like you said to your point, that's why they're there, right? You have them there because they're good at what they do and probably better in many ways than I would be. I just want to get that resource on the table. And I think that that comes from making enough mistakes to know that I don't have all the answers. And when I've thought that way, and believe me, I have, I'm sure you can tell I'm fairly forceful. That's gotten me into unnecessary suffering.
I can imagine. I've had some of those experiences myself on both sides. So, how, Dan, do you build cultures yourself, and how do you help your clients build cultures for themselves where people feel safe and empowered to bring their unique talents to everything that they do and feel safe saying, hey, I'm perfect here, but use
Yeah.
me in this way right now?
I look at it, I don't usually talk about safety. I talk about confidence. I want people to feel confident to take risks and know that they're going to be supported and they're going to be challenged. And there are a couple key elements. I think first, one needs to learn to master themselves, which is an ongoing process, a dynamic process of like, are you connected with what your strengths are? Are you connected with when your strengths are weaknesses? Are you connected to the different things, if you will, the kind of Jungian uh, idea of your shadow? Are you connected to and have you really come to terms with it? And are you willing to keep continuing to come to terms with your shadow, the things that kind of deteriorate your relationships, work against you, etc.? Can have you do you have the kind of mindset that can help you make those things allies for you? So in other words, I have I am quick to form an opinion. Obviously pretty opinionated, and so I want to be aware of that. I'm pretty confident in my opinion, so I want to also be open and reflective of other people's opinions. So knowing that about myself helps me engage because I can be a bully or I can be a bull in a china shop and just forge ahead, particularly if I get into survival. So I'm familiar with what are the signs that I'm moving into survival. So mastering myself that way um, is a valuable tool when I'm in there working with a couple, with a team. And I'm married, and to have a marriage work, I've been with my wife 50 years, 45 years married, and mastering myself has been crucial in being able to stay connected to my wife, and it's no different in business. And before you can lead others, I think that's vital. If people see I'm wrestling with myself and mastering myself, they have more confidence to follow when I want to lead, and that opens up the possibility for breakthrough results. And kind of key to that is accepting that I can't explain my way out of what I've behaved my way into. So taking responsibility for the results that I have and the stories I'm telling myself about those results, being familiar with them, and being willing to challenge those stories in order to look at what's good, wanted, and needed to get to the next level. When people experience me doing that with them, I know that that makes a difference. It invites them to do the same thing. So, and then, and finally, I think the third thing is realizing that what I refuse to face will eventually defeat me. So, and that's, it's not the mountain that I face that's going to defeat me. It's the pebble in my shoe. So, that's that old saying. So, you know, being willing to recognize the immediately the aspects of what you're doing aren't working doesn't mean the whole project's not working, but best to keep an eye on those things. And when somebody addresses them, be willing to look into them and work with them, because the idea is if you don't, those things will grow in their impact on what you're doing, which will also demand a lot more energy and time and effort and resource from you and the team to overcome. If it's like becoming a bottleneck in your own organization eventually, if I'm not willing to face the things that are difficult. So,
If I, as a leader, would like to become more conscious and act more versus the unconscious reacting that I'm starting to become conscious, I may be doing a lot. How would you suggest I get started?
well, I mean, awareness is a key, and there are a number of ways to become aware. I mean, we actually provide a leadership training that's a very intense training over 4 days called the Revenant Process. And we work with leaders awareness of what's going on for them as people, awareness of their impact on others. Like, how often do you actually check in to see what the impact of your participation is having on those on the team? Right? That's one way to get aware. And in this training, we do a lot of work with people managing their impact, like not just declaring what they're about, not just having a clear vision, which is very important, but also what impact am I having right now in current reality on that vision with the people I'm with, wherever I'm at? Do I pay attention to the signs? Am I tone deaf? Am I? And one way to know that is you get surprised a lot by the what leaders say to me when I'm working with them. I can't believe how what a stupid thing so and so did. They're just out to lunch. Well, how did they get out to lunch so far? They must have been there must have been some signs before that, and you know you you probably weren't paying attention. It's that kind of thing, and it requires a certain fascination with your team and people and like that's really most leaders are very fascinated with their projects and outcomes, which you must be, but understanding that that all happens through a team, through a relationship. Everything is relational through a conversation, because the conversation I'm in with people is the relationship. How fascinated am I with that? Because fascination, if you will, is the true and proper mother of discipline. So if I want something to be sustainable and I want something to, ongoingly produce results, it requires a fascination of about what's really going on right now. And current reality is very dynamic. It includes what people do, what they think about what they do, what they think of me or you or each other. All of that's part of current reality, and being fascinated with it creates a certain discipline. And you'll tend to listen for when things start to go sideways in basically the language people are in, right? So if I say, hey, here's a project, what do you think? Would you like to participate? Well, I don't know, Dan. Yeah, sure, I'd like to participate. I just want to make sure this I just want to make sure I'm not taken advantage of. Well, if I'm not willing to explore what that means, I'm going to find out what that means later on down the road. So I might just stop and go, geez, really, tell me more about this, what you just said, and explore that, because I might discover something that I needed to know, that this person might be a real quick assurance, or might be something easy to deal with, or I might have a second thought about where this person goes, or how they fit on in the project, right? There's things like that. So paying attention to those kinds of things, being aware of those things, which is part of my impact, will open up possibility and creativity, and save me energy, as well as, even though it might take a little more time in the front end, in the back end, I'm going to benefit I'm just going to benefit immensely, in a kind of a quantum way.
What you are calling fascination seems to me a lot like curiosity. How do those
Yeah.
two concepts relate to you, for you?
I think they're closely related. To be curious is one thing. Like, I can be curious and not really fascinated. I can be curious about what's going on just because I want to feel comfortable. I want to I want to be involved. But to be fascinated is I want to know all the details. So it's a form of curiosity that's it's compelling. It could be obsessive. I really am I mean, I've had people say it's not what you're making it up to be. I'll give you an example. I have a client that I've worked with for many years, and about a few years in with the client, I noticed that they really didn't have much of a governance set up in their organization, and I suggested that they set up some governance, and I referred one of my partners in to do that, and they got it halfway set up, and then they dropped it. And a few years later, I was working in an offsite with them, and I was listening to their CTO talk. And I'm not a tech guy, but I've had the privilege of managing large tech teams. I mean, I understand tech at a high level. I'm not a coder, but I've had the privilege of managing a team of engineers, of 180 engineers, and I've run a tech company. So I can tell when things aren't right just by the way people are talking. And I was listening to him talk, and I asked him about his stack, and I said, "Well, tell me about what's going on." And he said, "Well," I said, "How have you got this set up? How's it architected?" And he said, "Well, I'm a full stack engineer," and then he described what that was. And I said, "Well, you've just described the upper end of the stack. What about how does that, how do these languages connect with the machine? Like, do you program?" Because they were throwing bugs, and they were constantly, the technical debt was building, so they couldn't implement features, etc. And he got really kind of uppity with me, and he said, "Well, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a coder." I said, "No, you're correct, but it seems like you've got an architectural problem, that the reason these bugs keep coming, you're throwing so many bugs, and you're growing technical debt, is because you got problems, dissonance between the upper part of your stack and the lower part of your stack. I understand those principles, but I don't know how to fix them. As a leader, I've seen this many times." Well, he didn't want to even engage in it. 2 years later, the organization, they were very relevant in the market at the time, the market they were in, it's a tech company. Now I get a call back, and the tech stack had gone down. I mean, their it had gone down. And the issue now with the team was uptime. Like, how long can we keep it up? Which is horrible, because the market's going to pass you by, and competition is going to take you up. So they hired me, and I ended up bringing a tech guy in to help them think about refactoring all their code and what they need to do, and ways to do that. And but I, we had to kind of come to Jesus. Like, look, man, it was fine with me that you disrespected me. No problem. I'm not a tech guy, but I could see what I saw, and now we're dealing with it. And the CEO said, "Yeah, man, 2 years ago he said this." and now they've kind of moved this CTO, who happens to be a partner, to more of a board position, and they brought in a full blown engineer, CTO kind of engineer, and understands architecting, and they're re-architecting all their code. That could have been done 2 years ago if he was just curious enough to see if what I was saying might have might have had some relevance. But instead, his ego got in his way, and he just had no space for it until it got so bad. Right? He didn't want to deal with it then. Now it's defeating him in the long run. It's that kind of thing. So,
Right. What starts out seeming as this is just the way business works turns into this is taking the business down in a
yeah,
very short amount of time. And it takes a lot of work to resolve now. Back then would have taken much less work.
yeah, yeah. And I could tell, I was telling the CEO before I even had that conversation in that offsite, that the CEO was complaining about the CTO, who was his partner, hadn't been delivering on his, on his uh, promises, on his, OKRs. And over a long period of time, I said, that's not a good sign. This guy designed the stack. He knows what he's doing. There's something up for him. We ought to check in. And, the CEO was, I think, afraid because he's not a technical guy and he didn't want to lose his CTO. So he was afraid to get too rigorous in the press and even get fascinated with it. Like, it's not about finding out, it's not about exposing this guy or embarrassing him. It's, hey, how can we get shoulder to shoulder together and get fascinated about what does this mean for the organization? What's wanted and needed right now so we can continue what we're committed to? And what's the blocker? Let's name the blockers clearly so we can see what we need to put to test here. And that relationship, if it's not in it, that conversation is never going to be had, as it didn't until it's so vital that you have it. It's having you instead of you're having it, right? So,
Right. And it's a great example of how really small interventions can have big impact. And the earlier we can recognize that a tiny intervention might be useful, the more impact that tiny intervention can have in a positive way, and the less of the traumatic impact that intervention is likely to have.
right on. And I learned that the hard way. I ran a tech company before this, and I didn't want to. I was really much like that CEO, afraid to talk, press into the tech guys until our run rate was 450,000 a month, and we're burning up our ramp like nobody's business. It took me a good 6 months to go in and start to really try to understand and get. I resisted tech for a long time to really understand what was going on, and that 6 months cost me about $3 million, and the company failed, and ultimately it cost us about $40 million. And I can't help but think that if I would have been more, not just curious, but fascinated and willing to risk not, pissing people off and not looking good for the sake of what we were doing, and found a way to articulate that so they could join me, I can't help think that we might have saved not only that 3 million, but the company might have broken through. We were just a little ahead of the tech. We might have lasted long enough time to get so where the tech caught up and we could use what, like these large language models would have made a difference. This was 15 years ago. We didn't have those, but there were other things that might have made a difference then. So, that kind of thing.
It's a really clear example of how courage as a leader, the courage to show up and allow our fascination to show itself, to be vulnerable in asking questions about what we don't know, acknowledging that, and asking our people to help us understand the parts that we don't know. And well, At the same time, as we bring all the expertise we do have to bear on that quandary is critical to business
Yeah.
success.
It's to your earlier point, it requires leadership. If you're going to lead, you got to be aware of yourself, of your impact, of what's going on around you with others. Because those are the things that have really sabotaged me when I get disconnected, and I don't want the trouble. I'm afraid of what it's going to cost me. I think the middle of the road is a horrible place. I think, I'm just going to get run over, and um, because I've been there, I've done it, and so I really feel for leaders when they get into that place. But there's, I'm my job normally is to come in and say, "Hey, wait, wake up here. Look what's coming down the pipe if you don't move." And that's the way you create enough tension, healthy tension to move. Like, look, if we don't do this, what's coming? If we do this, what's coming? Like, let's weigh out the prices. Let's continue to account for when we're looking at what's wanted and needed. What's the price of what's wanted and needed? And are we exaggerating? You know what's interesting? By looking into the worst case scenarios, you can usually create some margin. Like, wow, I really thought that was horrible. But when I look at it, I could probably handle that if it came about. Now you've got somebody going forward into it, and there's a whole different way of being together and working together and inventing together that wasn't present when you're scared to even look at it. So a lot of the work of a leader for me is getting people to look into what they don't want to see and prepare for it just in case. Like, prepare for the worst and expect the best, but prepare for the worst so you're prepared. You have some dynamic. You're resourceful. You're flexible when circumstances shift and things don't show up the way you want them to, or you think they should, or the way you plan them to be. You're much more resourceful in that dynamic.
How else do you show the business value of creating these cultures where everyone is empowered to bring everything of who they are to everything that they do and engage their fascination and get into these uncomfortable conversations?
Well, I'm not an altruist. I want you to know that. So I I I I talk to leaders about the willingness to pay prices, because you're going to pay the prices. It's better to pay now than to pay later with penalties and interest. And that they're rightfully cautious, because they know if they have these conversations, they're going to start to see things they don't want to be bothered with. Right? I just don't want to
Yes.
mess with this shit. So, and you can. And here's how it shows up in their language. I'm not here to babysit these guys. That's the first sign. When I hear somebody say that to me, I know they're avoiding something, because nobody's saying, "Yeah, to babysit them." You got to get the stuff up, and you got to find out what that team member and that team, whoever's there, is made of, and you want to find out in the most inviting way, but not in a cowardly way. It's like, look, well, this is important because and I'm always bringing the vision in, the mission. This is why we're doing this. That's why we're having this conversation. It's not because you're a bad guy or incompetent. No, in fact, I'm having this conversation because I believe in your competence, and I believe together we can find out what's wanted and needed, and you'll deliver it. And if you can't, you'll find the right people to do that. But our job is to really do that, and because we don't want to be surprised as best we can. And if we are surprised, we want to be prepared for it so that we can move and use the surprise in our favor. That's one of the first things I ask. How can we use this? When I'm surprised, how can I use this in my favor? What did I not see, and how can I use this in my favor? And i.e., relating to the mission. Now, you start having those conversations, you find out what people are made of quickly, and whether or not they're going to fit on your team or not. I think people wait too long to find out. I want that conversation, if I can, in the interviews and in the onboarding process, etc. I want to know what these people are made of. How well do they handle breakdown? How innovative can they be? Do they communicate what they need when they're in it? Do they hide the breakdowns and try to look more competent, or are they willing to say, I got a breakdown here. Here's what I'm doing about it. What do you think? What that kind of thing. You need somebody who's committed to the mission more than they are to getting by, feeling comfortable, looking good, being right. Those things are there. Not that you shouldn't have them, they're there. But don't let them be bigger than what you came to get done. And a lot of times, your being right can make the difference. Just make sure, stand on the validity of the idea, not just being right. And that has a lot to do again with managing yourself and being aware of your own mechanisms. So a lot of my leadership in the culture is having people perpetually check into their own machinery and notice if what's going on is just about their ego or their need to look good, feel good, be right, or be in control, or is it really for the mission? And language will usually reveal that. And if you get specific enough with requests about what you need, and like if I say, well, okay, great, that I hear what you're saying. By when will this get done? Or what do you need to get that done? How long will it take? Like when we get down to real specific questions, we find out how somebody's really relating to the issue. Do they want to just be right about being stuck and they don't want to bother with the trouble of figuring it out, or bringing the team in, or are they truly engaged in that process? And if they are, I want to get them everything they can to get it figured out, and I want to join them.
What are some examples of how we can start to suss this out in the interview process?
Well, I mean, I really I watch how I like to have multiple interview processes with each of the team. Like in other words, if you're coming through and you're going to work with us, no, not only do I interview you, but I'm going to have people you're going to be working with on the executive team or leadership team or the middle management team you're going to be working with, interview you, hear their concerns and why they have those concerns. Then I want to sit down and see how you respond to their concerns. Their concerns may not be true. We're all aware, but I want to see how well you can receive them, how well you vet them, how much you look to learn from them, how much you're wrapped up in just getting the job, how defensive do you get, like that. It's just like, I was watching Robert F. Kennedy the other day in front of Congress getting grilled. I was impressed with, the things. It's fun to watch Congress. They just they they embellish and they do their thing. And this guy's going on and on, or this gal going on and on about how dangerous he is, and all these different things. And I'm watching Kennedy, and he's just listening, and he doesn't interrupt her until he gets really clear. Then he communicates. And then I noticed she couldn't hear him communicate back his point of view. Like she just wanted to filibuster her point. And he didn't have to say much. It was really obvious who was the insecure one, who really didn't have an argument, right? Like his argument was, okay, good, made sense, but he was relaxed. He heard what she said. He addressed it. He wasn't crazy about it. And he was focused on what the issue was, not preserving himself, which I found to be brought a lot of credibility. And I've seen a lot of leaders under pressure, even when they're wrong or it's not working, see that it's not working, handle it well, make corrections like that. Then that's really what you're looking for. So you want to look at how people engage with your difficult questions, or when people say something that it's a concern that they have, maybe just out of their intuition. Watch how the people respond to it, how they engage it, how they entreat it. I think that says a lot about their acumen, particularly their leadership acumen. Now, competency is a lot easier to find out. You can go test and check references, etc. But if I want to find out somebody's leadership acumen and if they're going to fit on my team, that's what I look for.
We've really been talking about this all the way through. Is there anything more you'd like to say about how you help people find their way through all the change, uncertainty, and overwhelm that seems to be everything life is these days?
Well, I mean, Uncertainty and overwhelm are psychological conditions that every human being is going to navigate. And the best way to do that is to be clear, one, about what you're there to accomplish, what you're committed to have happen, both result wise and relationally. Two, be willing to connect with the current reality you're in as it relates to those things. So get a sense of, and don't be afraid of, what's going on around you that is counterproductive to what you say you want to get done. In fact, that's where you're going to find most of the new resource. Be willing to look at it, speak honestly to it, investigate it. The more I'm willing to do that, the more I'm going to discover who my allies are, who's really on the team, where the resource is, and what's possible. Most people don't think that way. Most people want go in. I know I've done this multiple times. I just want to see what's working. Please tell me this is going to work out. Anything that looks like a breakdown somehow is a problem versus an opportunity. And I'm not speaking altruistically. I'm talking about realistically. Like you're going to have to deal with a problem. So, and usually dealing with the problem advances the cause if you do it well. So how do we do that here? Right? And I can't emphasize that enough. That's really where it all happens. That's where you get prepared for and you prepare the culture for what's wanted and needed.
Right. Engaging with, becoming fascinated with what seems to be a problem is critical to transforming that into an opportunity.
It's the old Stoic saying, the obstacle is the way.
The obstacle is the
Ryan,
way.
Ryan Holiday's book, I've really enjoyed it. Young guy coming up with that young. He's just, and it's really relevant. I've always been a fan of the Stoics. I found it to be helpful for me because I have produced a lot of my own problems. So facing those problems has brought a lot of self-revelation. So,
This might be a good point to talk about the free ebook you have for our audience.
Yeah, the change imperative. I wrote that back in the 90s, late 90s, or maybe mid 90s, when ESPN was being bought up by Disney. And I was working with a team, and there was a lot of change going on, right? Particularly, there was a lot of tension around ESPN was a right to work house. Disney was a union house. There was tensions there. Management was going through some tough stuff. There was just a lot of tension, a lot of different tension. But those were some of the that was the context, right? There was a lot going on. So I wrote that to help some of the guys I was coaching think about what it takes to make a change. And it goes through a very, like, as best I could, principles you can expect when you're going to make a change in any organization or any group of people. You can expect that about 20% of, or I would say maybe 30% if you're lucky, 20 to 30% of the people are going to be right on board. 30%, you're killing it. They're in. You're going to have another 20 to 30% that don't want things to change. We call them the levelers. They're just not interested in change. They've got their fiefdom. They're not interested in moving into the new possibility. So, we used to do ERP implementations. People don't want to put the information in. They've got to want to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't work. That kind of thing. And you got 40% of the people that are on the fence. And the idea is that leadership's job is to get that 40% over here with the 20 or 30% that is on board. And it's done through a number of different ways. One, it's done with how you engage the levelers, because some levelers will convert, but many of them won't. So you got to know how to deal with them. And that how you deal with them is the message, how you speak to them, the possibility you open with them, how you deal with their recalcitrance. Like, how do you deal with these folks will communicate to the 40%, as well as how you communicate with those who are on board. You want the people to see this. You want these people who are on board to win. You want them to get the resources they need. You want them to be. You don't want to just spend all your time over on the squeaky wheels. You got to make sure people are seeing that the resources, the attention, etc., is flowing over here. Even though you're going to pay some attention over here, you're going to let these levelers expose themselves, and they're going to either opt their way in or opt their way out. Now that's tension. So one of the things I've learned as a leader is that if you're not willing to embrace the tension, you're going to be run by the tension. Because your job, instead of having the vision occur, you're going to try to get rid of the tension. That's a mistake. Because now you're off purpose. You're just trying to relieve yourself and the team from the tension. And so you're no longer paying attention. Your attention is now to relieve the tension instead of to have the goal occur. So when you're in the tension, you got to ask yourself what's wanted and needed for the goal. And if it represents more tension, we got to think about how to do that and articulate it. And you got to get fascinated with what it takes to do that. That's part of the science and the art of leadership. So that pamphlet, that book, the ebook, it's about 90 pages, I think, or maybe 118, something like that. I haven't looked at it for a while. But that's designed to describe this process, to help you think through it, to give you an idea of, what's coming so that you're not surprised. If you know it's coming, because a lot of times there's certain things that have to occur. Usually things have to get worse before they get better. And if you know that and how that looks, you can be more confident in the process of navigating it. And that's what that pamphlet, that ebook's designed for.
That is super helpful. Thank you, Dan. And for people who would like to connect with you and engage their fascination on the obstacles that they want to turn into opportunities, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Best way would be you can reach me through takenewground.com is one way. You can contact me that way. You can reach out through email that way, etc. I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach me there. And Instagram. LinkedIn's probably better. And I'm happy to take an email, dan@takenewground.com. Love to talk.
Great. I'll have all those links on our show notes.
Thank you.
What would you like to leave our audience with today, Dan?
Well, you said it in the opening. I think if somebody has a vision big enough, that can call them through the pain of transformation, they'll never be held hostage by circumstance or history. And so the last thing, I guess, is I always say that goes with that: keep kicking at the indifference until it bleeds life in yourself and in others. It's like care. Learn to care. It's a discipline. And when people don't care around you, care about the fact that they don't care, because that's coming back to haunt you. That's really what I'd leave them with.
I love it. Thank you, Dan, for this fabulous conversation today.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, audience, for joining Dan and I here today. We would love to know, what are you engaging your fascination into? Thanks, and have a great day.